Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
Chirac is in your communities.
In a whirlwind session, Illinois legislators passed a package of anti-violence bills. We look at what did and didn't pass.
Pandemic versus endemic, what the future of COVID looks like amid a recent rise in cases. We talk one-on-one with the CEO of Rush.
A look at the pandemic's impact on the mental health of LGBTQ students.
Meet the new head of Chicago's Tourism Bureau and how she plans to bring more visitors to the city.
We've made it.
Judge Jackson's historic confirmation to the Supreme Court and what it could mean for the future of America's criminal legal system.
The former offices of the publisher behind the Dick and Jane children's series might be seeing some new life. That and more from Crain's.
And renovating a historic theater inside the Fine Arts Building, a home for artists for more than a century. But first, some of today's top stories. Philanthropist and businessman Willie Wilson announces he will run for mayor in an effort to deny Mayor Lori Lightfoot a second term after endorsing her during the 2019 runoff. Wilson, who has run for mayor twice before, vows to make fighting crime and lowering taxes the centerpiece of his campaign and has committed $5 million to fund his bid. He says he regrets his previous support for Lightfoot.
I had two choices. Tony Petwinker, she was raising taxes and taxes and taxes, and I don't believe in raising taxes, So we went that way. But I made a mistake. I made a hell of a mistake.
And there's more of this story on our website. President Joe Biden announces a crackdown on so-called ghost guns, guns made from kits and have no serial number. Biden says his administration will require the makers of gun kits to include a serial number and to conduct a background check prior to purchase, as with other gun sales.
These guns are weapons of choice for many criminals. We're going to do everything we can to deprive them of that choice. And when we find them, put them in jail for a long, long time. Today, the United States Department of Justice is making it illegal for a business to manufacture one of these kits without a serial number.
And on Saturday, Illinois lawmakers also passed legislation to outlaw ghost guns. That bill is now headed to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk. Amanda Vinicky has more news on that coming up. A groundbreaking ceremony today to build an accessible group home for seniors with intellectual and developmental disabilities on the southwest side. The group home is expected to cost more than $1 million. The nonprofit Envision Unlimited says the project was made viable thanks to the donation of a corner lot and more than $500,000 in materials and services from Chicago area construction companies. The first residents are scheduled to move in by December. Up next, a recap of the latest legislation out of Springfield. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Chicago is among cities nationwide dealing with a surge of violence. Addressing that was a focus for Illinois legislators over the weekend as they wrap up their spring session. Our Amanda Vinicky was in Springfield during the legislative action and joins us now. Amanda, lawmakers were busy and they worked until sunup, from what I understand, on Saturday. What did they do in terms of addressing crime?
Well, Paris, for some legislators, this is personal. Just before Christmas, State Senator Kimberly Lightfoot was with her husband when something terrifying happened. She says it was like out of a movie. They were carjacked by 4 men wielding guns.
My husband told me to run. I was terrified, and I believe that I stopped breathing. I just thought with every step that I would be hit with a bullet in my back. And I just knew they'd killed my husband. It was about a lot of shooting going on, so I just thought he'd be gone.
Lightfoot nor her husband were physically hurt, and Lightfoot says as far as she knows, her assailants have not been caught. It is scenarios like this that have crime at the top of the agenda for voters and elected officials alike. Now, a series of bills are going to be heading to the governor's desk that are targeted at public safety. For example, Carjackers don't heed municipal boundaries. One measure allows law enforcement to cooperate across jurisdictions. Other measures are meant to help retain, recruit, and support police.
Departments like the sheriffs, the state police, and hopefully identify some of the underlying organization that's going on, hopefully do a better job of effectuating arrests.
We're looking at 150% more presence of state troopers on the street. We need to do it during peak criminal hours. In terms of technology, we've expanded access to cameras on expressways.
Now, another bill that passed waives any speeding tickets, fines, or fees after a victim's car has been stolen. That's something that House Republican leader Jim Durkin says municipalities already do. They waive those fees. Republicans had instead been pushing for harsher penalties. He says his niece is traumatized after recently she was carjacked in Lincoln Square.
What have you guys done with this horrible crime wave that's coming to the state of Illinois? I'm going to say that the majority party, what they've done is they've created a council on hijacking, and they're going to waive your parking and traffic fees. Congratulations, folks.
According to the Cook County Sheriff, there were more than 2,000 carjackings in Cook County last year. He says that is more than in New York and LA combined. Sheriff Tom Dart says that one complication with catching culprits is an inability to track their cars, even vehicles that are equipped with technology that would allow that. He lobbied for a bill that would create a hotline law enforcement could call 24/7 so that auto manufacturers could facilitate that tracking right away after a crime.
This is doable. And I really would have a hard time with the sympathy party for a lot of these manufacturers. They make billions of dollars. Are you trying to tell me they can't set up a 24-hour hotline? Literally, that's what we're looking for.
Evidently, however, that was not politically doable or feasible because that bill did not advance. Lawmakers did pass a measure, as you noted, that deals with these so-called ghost guns, making them illegal. Senator Jackie Collins says that criminals use them to evade police.
We see individuals who are domestic violence abusers or mentally ill, and just the basic criminal that you're trying to stop with the carjacking. They have these ghost guns, and the investigators and the police and law enforcement is not able to solve the issue of the crime because they're untraceable.
Another controversial, highly negotiated measure cracks down on so-called smash and grab robberies. Part of what it does, creates a brand new crime, organized retail theft.
And what we're trying to do with the bill is to get to the big fish. We don't want to get the little fish. We're not interested in little shoplifting, things like that. We want to get to the enterprise, and this, we think, with the language that we changed, is going toward the manager, the recruiter, the organizer, the supervisor, financing specifically these acts.
Many Republicans voted for it, saying that it does have good elements, like the state attorney general can call a statewide grand jury to go after organized retail theft organizers. Also, third-party vendors will soon have to require sellers to share information. This is a means of cutting off the market for reselling stolen goods. But in terms of punishing those who actually coordinate and rob stores, well, Republicans say it has no teeth.
Sit around until this late hour, and this is what we've come up with? Our stores in this state, many of which have not recovered from the pandemic, most of which have not recovered from the pandemic, and they are being targeted in a way that we have not seen before by retail thefts. And what do? You just change the words around and allow them to be charged with the exact same thing. Well, guess what's going to happen? Nothing.
Republicans say that Democrats are still being too soft on crime, but Democrats like Representative Justin Slaughter say that it is past GOP tough on crime policies that are responsible.
You don't care about public safety. If you did, you would know. In the black community, it's been a state of emergency for a really long time now. But now, Chirac is in your communities. And now it's a state of emergency.
Incendiary words there in the final, as you noted, wee hours of the legislative session. This is not over, though. Really, this legislative debate, a preview of what is to come in this year's election. Crime sure to be central in many campaigns, particularly that for governor. With that, Paris, back to you.
And Amanda, for that reason, the session ended early so folks could go campaign for that primary in June. Thank you very much. And now to Brandis and Rush Hospital's CEO. Brandis.
In Paris, health officials are saying COVID has worsened the chronic healthcare worker shortage, resulting in burnout and a sped-up track to retirement for many. Meanwhile, COVID cases are slightly increasing across the state due to the spreading Omicron BA.2 subvariant. And just today, the World Health Organization says it's tracking 2 more subvariants of the Omicron strain, BA.4 and BA.5. So joining us now to discuss all this and more is Dr. Omar Latif, CEO and president of Rush University Medical Center. Dr. Latif, thank you for joining us. Now, this recent uptick in cases in Illinois isn't nearly as high as it was during the Omicron surge. Illinois is reporting just over 1,400 COVID cases today. Now, that's up from 756 cases a week ago, according to the data from the Illinois Health Department. Now, that's in comparison to a high of more than 42,000 new cases reported on January 7th, the height of the Omicron, this surge. Is there still cause, Dr. Latif, for concern?
Well, there's always a little bit of cause for concern, but I think the numbers that you mentioned are indeed sobering, but when you take them into context with hospitalizations, it presents a little bit of a different picture. When you go back to January and you quoted those large numbers, at the peak, there were over 7,000 admissions in the state of Illinois to hospitals. And that was creating a drain on the healthcare system. When you fast forward to this month, there's less than 500 admissions. And so while the numbers are increasing, the number of hospitalizations are actually decreasing. So while there's spread of the disease, there's not spread of acute and severe illness. So the threat of overwhelming the healthcare institutions are definitely lower than they've ever been before. And we know that people are doing significantly better with these new variants in terms of their response to the infection.
Now, when we spoke to you last, Dr. Latif, it was in the middle of this Omicron surge. Your hospital, Rush, was experiencing a staffing shortage. How would you describe your situation today?
Well, we've shifted our thoughts of the staffing shortage from an acute problem to more of a chronic problem, to use a medical term. We are still surrounded every day when we come to work by heroes who are coming to work short-staffed in many ways. But what we know is that we have certainly enough providers to take care of all the patients that we have, as well as enough providers to actually flex up if we had to, if we ultimately went through another surge. The reality is, we need to grow that net population of providers across the country because the staffing shortage is not isolated to just Chicago. It's a national phenomenon. And while we've adjusted to it now, we leverage technology, we figured out other ways to help decrease the impact of the staffing shortage, and we'll continue to do so. Ultimately, we have a growing population, and we need to have a growing number of healthcare providers in this country.
You just talked about this a little bit as far as like leveraging technology. Give us a deeper sense, if you would, about how you and other health systems are addressing this shortage, how you hope to address this shortage, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, generally, whenever anyone asks me about the pandemic, I tell them it's the worst case scenario in just about every category. The only place where the pandemic may have actually improved healthcare in America is it forced us to advance technologically more rapidly than we otherwise would have. And so the best example of that are things like telehealth, where you can offer up and improve access to people that couldn't otherwise get access through telehealth, and then create a way, a almost digital front door to bring patients that need to come in. That's not just related to COVID, but that's related to all illness. And so we learned during the pandemic to be innovative and figure out how to improve access and get people the health care that they need without physically having to come to the hospital. Other innovative ways we've done that was to get care to people and bring back that sort of old wisdom of home visits. And the reality is, if we can provide care at home, then we can save that need. It's more comfortable for a patient there, as well as it doesn't utilize those resources in a healthcare system.
Dr. Latif, would you say that, COVID, is it beginning to shift from pandemic to endemic, or is it too soon to say that yet?
Well, it does certainly seem like that. It does certainly seem. But however, I would say that the science behind the way we learn in healthcare is by tracking something over time and then reporting on it in retrospect. So when someone asks how long will this vaccine work, we give the vaccine to hundreds of people in a certain area. And then when they start getting infected again, we know that that vaccine effectiveness has gone down. So predicting how long a vaccine works, as you've seen played out throughout the world, has been very difficult. The reality is some vaccines last a lifetime, some vaccines last a short time. Here's what we know. We know that now when you look back over the last several years, or the last couple years, and we've had COVID come in surges and COVID deteriorate in surges, we've seen the response and critical illness of patients ameliorate. They're getting less sick over time. And so that does portend a prognosis that means we're going to shift into something very similar as a cold. I can't guarantee that. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be another variant that comes out like Omicron that spreads and does this again. But what we're seeing is an ebb and a flow, an up and down of this, and we're seeing increased herd immunity. We're seeing people's bodies get vaccinated. We're seeing people recover from the vaccine, and both are offering a level of protection. So it is very likely that over time, the long-term projection is that the acuteness will continue to decline.
And you just mentioned, herd immunity. Are we closer to reaching that?
Yeah, we are. So the United States of America is amazing in the sense that there is vaccine availability. There is enough vaccine for everybody in this country to go get a vaccine. And you can do that. And really, the numbers to get to herd immunity are somewhat complicated. Some people would say 90%, some 80%, some even 70%. We're not at any of those numbers right now. But we're certainly at a point where when you get up near 70, 80%, you see the acuity go down and you see hospitalizations dramatically decrease. And what's helped so much wasn't people getting sick. We were trying to prevent people from getting critically ill, people from dying from the disease. And that we're seeing from the rates of the vaccination uptick we've had. However, there's still nothing better than to continue getting a higher vaccination rate as much as possible. If we could vaccinate every single person in the world, there's reason to believe that this would go away.
So we've got a few seconds left, Dr. Lateef. Obviously COVID's not only taken a very physical toll on everyone, but a mental one as well. What do you see as the long-term impact of COVID on mental health and how that can be addressed?
I think over the next several decades, we'll be writing papers on the impact to mental health of this period in time. It has to do with regular people living their lives and what happened when you were stuck at home or when the cities were in lockdown. We've seen incredible rates of depression and incredible rates of anxiety. We have no idea what the effect of not going to school is going to be long term. So much of our learning comes from the trials and tribulations of being in school and going through day-to-day life. And we also know that healthcare workers have an unprecedented amount of mental health issues right now. And we don't have the resources in the country right now to take care of the mental health needs we have. So the truth of the matter is COVID exacerbated an already mental health crisis in this country, and we will continue to develop ways to improve access to the mental health services we have.
And created, of course, a lot of ongoing work for you and your team, Dr. Omar Lateef there at Rush. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And now to Paris and the new head of Chicago's Tourism Bureau. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. The city's official tourism organization has a new leader with a mission to attract more visitors to Chicago. This comes as COVID has kept tourism numbers down and as Chicago's Magnificent Mile faces a 25% vacancy rate. Last month, Mayor Lori Lightfoot named Lynn Osmond CEO of Choose Chicago. Osmond is the former head of the Chicago Architecture Center and the first woman to lead the city's tourism bureau. And joining us now with more is Lynn Osmond, CEO of Choose Chicago. Congratulations on the new position and thank you for joining us. Lynn Osmond, first off, give us a sense of the current hotel vacancy rates and the general rate of tourism in the city right now.
Well, I think let's look ahead. If we look at going ahead, we've actually got 176 meetings that are planned in the city for this year. That's going to be 1.7 million visitors and it'll be 1.2 million room rates. So we're seeing the ramping up of both the interest, meetings being running at about a 65% rate when people have been coming in, which I think is great considering we're still coming out of the pandemic. So we're really think of it as crescendo, and we're really moving forward to a strong summer season.
When do you think those numbers might be back to pre-COVID levels?
think all of us in the industry, I just finished a 2-day meeting with the U.S. Travel Association. I think everybody's thinking that's 24, 25, but we're seeing a really quick rebound in terms of leisure. And some of the weekend numbers at the hotels are really starting to match what we did in 2019 for this period. So we are seeing some recovery from the leisure traveler, and we're seeing some interest, a lot of interest actually, from the business traveler.
We know COVID has been a big detractor, but how big a hindrance is this perception among some who may not be so familiar with the city that crime is out of control in Chicago, and it might keep them from traveling here, either for leisure or business?
I think every big city is struggling with this. I think that we've seen an increase with, crime is a factor of not having a lot of people on the street. And as we see the population start returning, businesses starting opening and coming back, we're also seeing a decrease in this in the urban areas. And so I think it's really important that we change the narrative, that we get back downtown and we support our businesses and get the Mag Mile busy again. And we're seeing, I was just on there at noon today, and there's a lot of people humming around getting ready for that the April holiday week of Easter.
So more foot traffic, more activity might repel some of that crime that's been happening. And you speak of the Mag Mile.
Absolutely.
There was that recent report that said that the vacancy rate along Michigan Avenue there is about 25%. How does the city go about filling those locations up again?
Well, I think Kimberly Bears and the Magnificent Mile Association are really looking at what's the next thing to fill those retail spots. And we have actually, there's a print show that's going to be a pop-up experience, and we're seeing a lot of pop-up galleries happening. So I think that, while it's challenging, this is not going to get fixed right away. There are a number of interesting experiential retail concepts that are being talked about that we should see starting to happen in the future. When
you say pop-up locations, are you saying that like reimagining the Mag Mile might involve not making it 100% retail or restaurant, but things like galleries or museums?
Well, we're already seeing in the new Tribune Tower, we're seeing the new ice cream museum. I can't wait to go and see that and taste it. As I said, we've got the print show that follows the office experience. There's a couple of shops, such as this wonderful Mexican shop on the avenue that was a temporary for Christmas. That's actually done so much business that it's staying on in the longer term. So we're just seeing these new concepts being experimented with. Retail is not dead. People still want to go to stores, but maybe they don't want to go to the big box stores. And so we have to look at what that future is. We look at roastery. The roastery's always got lineups outside of it. So there are concepts that people are really supportive of.
You're talking about that Starbucks location there on Michigan Avenue, multi-story. And as long as Rainbow Cone is part of that ice cream museum, maybe I'll go visit it. So tell us about your vision to attract more tourism to Chicago and for the department Choose Chicago.
Well, I'm really excited about promoting now Choose Chicago, because for so many years, for the last 25 years, I've been promoting the architecture of our wonderful city and really talking about what makes our city unique. And some of that uniqueness is really about our neighborhoods and those authentic experiences. And I think that one of the trends in travel we see are people wanting to experience and explore and get into the neighborhoods. Chicago has 77 neighborhoods that are so rich. How do we create those cultural experiences to get them not just downtown, but also extend their stay to go out to the neighborhoods in the city? As you know, we're just finishing Restaurant Week. That has been just a smashing success. We have to keep on increasing our server capacity to deal with all the people who wanted to book restaurants. And I can tell you, being out last night, they were hopping on a Sunday night. So it's great to see that. So there's so many experiences that are unique in Chicago. When you think about other cities across this country, they're not the same. Orlando, Las Vegas, many people, we say compete with them. Well, I don't think we do, because I think we have a unique big city experience that is just iconic. And so those are some of the things, and also to look at how do we continue to build the meeting business and really build back a strong Chicago.
Yeah, I agree. Las Vegas, Orlando, they don't have any kind of big city experience that comes close to Chicago, but the city does compete with those cities for the convention business. How important is getting the overall convention business back to where it was, and how might the new casino play into that?
Well, the convention business is critical. You know, when I was talking about the numbers that we had 1.2 million room nights that are going to happen this year, just from the meetings that are currently booked, you know, that's 1.87 billion effect on the local economy. So, and that only grows with the more business that we have. The casino, I think, will be an added attraction in the city. It is, I'm glad that now we've separated it from the actual convention, because one of our advantages against Las Vegas is that we don't distract people from the convention floor, that we keep them in the convention area, doing what they're supposed to be doing, is learning and looking at products that support their industry. And I think the casino will really enhance our ability as a city to attract new business.
And I understand that Choose Chicago, its own staff has shrunk throughout the pandemic. What can you do with a smaller staff, and do you plan to grow the agency a little more?
Well, I'm glad to say that our money from the city and the state is stabilized for the next couple of years, so that allows us to look ahead. We're in the process of hiring a new executive vice president of sales, and we will continue to grow our staff, but I think we'll grow smartly. I think every business, including the Chicago Architecture Center, we all went through downsizing, and we're all growing in a different way coming back. So what are the positions that are key to driving our business, and how has the organization changed because of COVID? Choose Chicago has gone through a recent strategic planning process. I was glad that I was vice chair when we were going through that. So really spent a lot of time looking at what the opportunities are and how we build that.
Tourism so essential to the city's economy and just to the quality of life here. And our thanks to Lynn Osmond. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
And up next, renovations for a building that's been a long-time haven for artists. So please stay with us.
Certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through.
I think that Americans are finally beginning to embrace that we are African, we are indigenous, we are European, we are Asian, we are everything.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including a startling rise in suicides among LGBTQ teens. But first, a landmark building in Chicago has historically been a home to the arts. It's the aptly named Fine Arts Building on South Michigan Avenue, and parts of the building are being renovated to their former glory. Producer Mark Vitale has a look at some of the finer points of the Fine Arts Building.
It opened in 1885 as the Studebaker Building, a showroom and assembly plant for carriages. 13 years later, it was remodeled and repurposed as the Fine Arts Building. Frank Lloyd Wright had an office, Poetry magazine was first published here, and early women's rights groups were welcome in this space. Through many changes in the last 125 years, the building remains dedicated to artists and free thinkers. These days, it's home to the Chicago Puppet Studio, a gallery of art glass, a bookstore, and both music teachers and makers of musical instruments. It is also the last place in Chicago that still employs elevator operators.
I think the last four are right here in this building. 2 during the day, 2 at night. It has a lot of ups and downs.
2 theaters within the building are being renovated.
We are in the Studebaker Theater, which is a historic venue for over 125 years. We are in the process of remodeling it and revitalizing it to reopen this spring, and we are updating all of the audio-video infrastructure, making it a more production-friendly and a more audience-friendly venue.
Over the years, the Studebaker Theater has presented Henry Fonda, Helen Hayes, Eartha Kitt, and many others to Chicago audiences. Murals on the 9th floor include tributes to theater and other artistic passions pursued in this building.
It is the home of one of Chicago's original artist colonies. It's a 10-story building full of workshop spaces, offices, and studios of local artisans. We have everything from dance companies, orchestra companies, architects, music instrument makers. What's so cool and special about this moment with the Studebaker is creating a space for the live and performing arts to now re-exist in the building in the same way that the fine arts exist in the building right now.
It's a really cool building to work in, for sure. A few times a day we'll walk
go to the 9th floor and take the stairs down because we'll hear somebody practicing opera or the cello or the violin. And it really does have a calming effect on us throughout the rest of the day. I think everybody feels like that in the building.
We have a wonderful community of tenants. You know, there's so many various artists and musicians that have been in here over the course of my life and our business's lifespan. We have had crazy and cool neighbors and lots of experiences with the public coming into the building. It has a lot of personality, a lot of quirks, and a lot of ghosts.
And what it really, really, truly is about is a shared community experience, bringing people together from all corners of the city and building bridges between communities. That's a thing that the arts do, that the live arts do, the performing arts, the fine arts do in a way that nothing else really can.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And the Fine Arts Building is at 410 South Michigan Avenue. The Studebaker Theater within the building presents the Chicago Jazz Orchestra in May. Later in the year, it will host the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra and Chicago Opera Theater. Now, Paris, back to you.
All right, Brandis, thanks very much. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, the impact of inflation on a local food giant responsible for products like Slim Jim. That and more business news from Crain's. What's behind a startling rise in suicides among LGBTQ teens? Local therapists share their thoughts. And Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's historic confirmation to the Supreme Court and what it could mean for the future of America's criminal legal system. But first, some more of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announces that the city's summer jobs program for youth will pay all participants the city's minimum wage of $15 an hour. Those aged 14 to 24 can apply for job and skills training at a variety of city departments and agencies by filling out the One Summer Chicago application online. The mayor says the program will have no capacity limits and the city will have an aggressive outreach program targeting youth who may have trouble accessing the program.
We know that summer jobs make a difference. They are meaningful and impactful. We do not want any young person who needs a job this summer not to be able to access it because of the digital divide or other barriers that might keep them back from being able to apply and take advantage of these opportunities.
After months of organizing, workers at El Milagro tortilla factories say they've won wage increases collectively worth $1.3 million. Since organizing with the support of nonprofit Arise Chicago, the workers say in a statement they've won wage increases, ended 7-day work weeks, and began anti-sexual harassment training for their managers. But they say the company has not yet fulfilled a promise to close on Sundays and that they are still being, quote, worked like machines, while saying the company refuses to negotiate with them directly. And now to Brandis with some of today's top business headlines. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. A New York firm adds a former Office Max headquarters to its buying spree in Chicago. What's next for the vacant office campus of a former publishing company? And inflation forces a Chicago-based food giant to get meaty. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Welcome back, Danny. So this East Coast investor just bought an abandoned Office Max headquarters in Naperville after purchasing some downtown office buildings. Tell us who this New York firm is and what this latest string of purchases means.
Yeah, so it's a group called Opal Holdings. What they bought was actually the redeveloped former Office Max headquarters that was purchased 4 years ago and revived, renovated, and filled up with some different tenants. But Opal Holdings, they've been snapping up properties in other cities too. They just spent almost $650 million on a bunch of buildings, including the Leo Burnett building downtown and Caterpillar's headquarters up in Deerfield, as well as one in Downers Grove. Now they've purchased what's called the Schumann now for $73 million in Naperville. And they've done well with this building. And what they're basically betting on is that the high quality, new or renovated buildings, office buildings, are going to weather the storm well at a time when companies are trying to compel workers to show up and not work from home. They believe that the newest and most up-to-date buildings will do well.
Now, also in other office real estate news, the former Scott Forsman office campus in Glenview, that's known for publishing the Dick and Jane children's book series. It's been vacant for quite some time, but that may not be the case for much longer. What do you know about this 19-acre plot of land?
Well, it's now in position to be redeveloped into something potentially very different. There's a Chicago developer called R2 that is actually better known for its work downtown. that just bought the mortgage on the property, which the owner of the property was facing foreclosure. So it puts R2 now in position to do something with the site itself or to sell it to another developer. It could be demolished and turned into residential use, or again, something entirely different. There could be some pushback from preservationists. Actually, this complex was on the 2021 list of most endangered historic sites in Illinois because it's an architecturally significant project. So it'll be another suburban site that'll be worth watching for the next couple of years as a bellwether of commercial real estate.
So lastly, not in real estate, a local food giant known for Slim Jim jerky and Healthy Choice frozen meals says it expects to spend 50% more on meat ingredients. Tell us why.
Well, what isn't costing a lot more these days? The company said last week that inflation is the main driver that's driving up the price of beef and chicken and pork products and turkey, enough to cut its full-year earnings, actually. And ConAgra said that's going to translate to higher prices for meat snacks like Slim Jim and its Healthy Choice frozen food products. And it's not just ConAgra. Portillo's also recently said that its meat costs were going up. So we might expect to be paying more for Italian beef and hot dogs.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have noticed the cost of food going up lately. Danny Ecker, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Approximately 1 in 3 high school students experienced poor mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the prevalence of poor mental health was highest among gay, lesbian, or bisexual students. That's according to new CDC data examining how high schoolers have been affected by the pandemic. On top of COVID-related stressors, an onslaught of anti-LGBTQ laws across the country are taking a toll on young people's mental health. And joining us now with more are Lola Wong, therapist and owner of Fig Tree Counseling, and Iggy Ladden, the founder and director of the Chicago Therapy Collective. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. So I want to look at some graphics from the CDC. So according to that agency, 5% of heterosexual students attempted suicide compared to 26% for gay, lesbian, and bisexual students, and then other or questioning 16.5% as attempting suicide. Iggy Ladden, what do you make of this data?
It's really scary and sad to hear about what's going on, not just for LGBTQ youth, but youth across the board are reporting increases in suicidal thoughts. 20% of non-LGBTQ youth are seriously contemplating suicide, and 44% of LGBTQ youth are reporting serious thoughts of suicide, anxiety, depression, complex PTSD are all overwhelming high school students, especially LGBTQ youth at this time.
Shocking numbers. And Lola, talk about the impact of the pandemic on youth in general, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, but then also LGBTQ youth of color, how it's impacting all those communities.
LGBTQ youth of color, they face very unique stressors. For example, in the past 2 years, we've seen hate crimes against Asian and Black people rose sharply in the U.S. With our clients from our direct clinical work, we see that Black LGBTQ clients, especially youth, they're significantly more likely to associate racism and gun violence as their major stress, while their white peers are more likely to say transphobia or anti-LGBT hate crime. Another example is Asian American individuals are more likely to underuse mental health services, which resulted in a lot of AAPI youth. They don't have access to affirming counseling service. We also need to consider the nuances of intersectionality, like a youth of color with undocumented family struggle with stability. They may face really different situation compared to their white, cis, middle class peers. And these are all the factors affecting their mental health symptoms, support system, and also access to mental health. We also need to consider the racism from within the LGBT community. When we're talking with a youth of color and they're trying to come out, their narrative might be very different from their white peers.
Iggy Ladden, you mentioned that across the board, the suicide rates and those thinking about suicide have gone up during the pandemic. Is it just the isolation of the pandemic? Is it the stress? Is it social media? Is it all of those things?
Yeah, I'd say all of the above. Social isolation might be highest in terms of COVID-related factors. That really has impacted youth across the board. And research has found that the more socially connected youth are in general, LGBTQ youth are in general, the more resilient they are in the face of all of these stress factors. Add to that for the LGBTQ community and the trans community, especially community members of color, our political climate. And you have an overwhelming amount of stress that we're placing on LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ youth of color. The Trevor Project found that 95% of surveyed LGBTQ youth found that listening to political debate in this time was hurting their mental health.
And speaking of that political, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of that political environment, Lola Wang, we mentioned the bills that are being considered or passed in states targeting trans youth and gender-affirming care. What is the impact on trans youth of these bills?
First of all, there are actual barriers that has been set up. For example, a lot of youth, they don't have access to trans-affirming care, which is not just trans-affirming, it is life-saving care. In addition to that, some bills also prevented user coping skills. For example, for some youth, they like to play sports, and there are bills that prevent them to play sports because of their gender identity. And for youth, they're also subject to external environment. For example, when you're seeing those bills, it's not only for the LGBTQ youth, it's also for their friends, for their teachers. So that could potentially cause more bullying. And internally, we are all coping with a rapid changing pandemic world, which is a lot of insecurities and changes. And all of us, our mental health is fragile. For LGBTQ youth, that's even worse because for them, they're no longer in a safe environment. They was never in a safe environment, and now we're seeing that it's getting worse. And we're working with clients when they're struggling with fear and anxiety. We always ask them, is this fear justified? Unfortunately, during the past years, we've seen a lot of that is indeed justified, and a lot of the work we're doing is trying to accept things and then trying to gradually make changes on a more macro level.
And Iggy Ladden, some of these bills, they're targeting gender-affirming care, especially among trans youth. Can you just talk about what goes into the decision and how difficult that is for trans youth that go forward with gender-affirming care?
I think it just makes the whole climate of trusting oneself, one's body, that much scarier. It already is a very courageous thing to do as a trans person to say, I am trans and I want to live my life authentically. And hearing that, one's provider might be attacked, one's parents might be criminalized, and that oneself might be related to as mentally unwell just for being trans just makes it that much harder to take that courageous step and start living one's life in the most authentic and healthy way possible for them.
Lola Wang, we only have 30 seconds left, but quickly, how should parents be talking to their kids about this?
You don't want to hide what's happening, so you can talk about the current event in an age-appropriate way. You should validate their worries. At the same time, try not to let your own worries and fear to affect them. What's important is to talk with them. There are a lot of things out of control, but what are some of the things that we can control? For example, in this family, what are some of the concrete things that we can do to help you gain some kind of safety? Like we can use the right pronouns. We can also educate our family. We can educate the school, the educators. There are still a lot of things we can do, and that is important to focus on.
All right, a lot to think about, and our thanks to Lola Wang and to Iggy Ladden. Thank you so much. And up next, what a historic Supreme Court nomination means for the future of America's criminal legal system in a conversation that first aired on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is set to become the first black woman to sit on the Supreme Court. It's a historic moment. Jackson herself was able to take it in while speaking outside the White House Friday.
It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. But we've made it.
Judge Jackson watched with President Biden as the Senate voted to confirm her nomination on Thursday. The vote fell mostly along party lines, 53-47, with 3 Republicans joining Democrats in voting in favor. Judge Jackson is set to be sworn in as the 116th Supreme Court Justice sometime this summer when Justice Stephen Breyer steps down. Joining us now with more are Audra Wilson, President and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, and Kalia Coleman, former president of the Black Women Lawyers Association of Greater Chicago. Thanks to you both for joining us. Kalia, let's start with you. Judge Jackson's confirmation makes it the first time, as we said, that a black woman will sit on the highest court in the nation, the 233-year-old Supreme Court. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who led the confirmation process as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he reflected on this momentous occasion and how it'll go down in history. Let's take a look.
In the years to come, long after we've left the Senate, one of our grandchildren may ask where we were on this historic day, April 7th, 2022, when America broke down what seemed like an impossible racial barrier and voted to send the first African-American woman to serve on our highest court. I will be proud to say I was on the Senate floor, standing at my desk and casting my vote with pride for the next Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Kalia Coleman, why is this moment so monumental?
This moment is so monumental because Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope. As a black woman lawyer, as a member of the Black Women Lawyers Association of Greater Chicago, this is such an inspiring moment. Now we can really say that every young black girl can look to Justice Jackson and know that they too can ascend to the highest court in the land. This moment is so monumental because we are now moving towards and have some reassurance that we are moving towards forming that more perfect union. Now the highest court in the land really reflects the diversity of America. And that is essential when we talk about the justice system. It's a monumental moment because we have Justice Jackson, who will serve as the first federal defender to ever sit on the highest court, a court that oftentimes presides over decisions involving criminal law. She fundamentally understands the criminal process. She understands criminal law, criminal procedure. She will provide a very, very important voice to those discussions as the justices are making deliberations in order to set precedent that will have long-standing impact for years to come.
And to that point, Audra, you know, as we just heard Kalia say, you know, it's the first time that a former defender, a former public defender, sits on the Supreme Court. What does that say about how, you know, our opinion and our impression of public defenders has shifted?
Well, historically, the path to becoming a judge, even the local, state, and federal courts, is to be a prosecutor, or work for a large law firm, or be a litigator for the government. And this would typically leave out former public defenders, civil rights lawyers, and other sorts of attorneys that are working for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and any other organizations that are challenging the government. So having this confirmation is so significant because we see now there is more of a possibility for professional diversity to be represented in the future. And as Kalia also mentioned, with respect to discussions in the criminal legal system, which are front and center nowadays, her time as a public defender will enable her to bring a more nuanced perspective, specifically one from clients. So this is definitely momentous.
Kalia, Jackson's confirmation, it doesn't really change what we know to be so far the conservative leaning of the court, but what kind of impact might she have on cases?
Well, that is true. It doesn't change the conservative majority, but there's a voice that will be present during those discussions that was not present before. And that voice is one, as I previously stated, will be one that comes with different experiences. And hopefully based on her different experiences and unique perspective that she will bring, while it doesn't change the majority ideological composition, hopefully it creates a different level of consideration based on, how she will articulate her views and her perspectives about different issues.
So this fall, the Supreme Court will also hear a challenge to Harvard University's use of race as a factor in admissions. Now, it's a case that could impact affirmative action cases nationwide, and we know that Justice Brown Jackson, she currently serves on Harvard's Board of Overseers, but she testified in Senate hearings that she would recuse herself from that case. Audra, do you think that's the right move?
I do think that's the right move to make. The truth of the matter is that Supreme Court justices typically make their own decisions as to whether to recuse themselves. Federal law requires federal judges to disqualify themselves in any proceeding in which their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. So although she doesn't have to follow that standard, I think it's probably the prudent thing to do.
I mean, this is something, as you just mentioned, that justices have been accused of not doing enough, of policing themselves a little bit more and choosing to recuse themselves when it might be necessary. Should justices be policing themselves more, Audra?
That's a good question, especially in light of what's been happening with the January 6th proceedings and the concern, a major concern about the impartiality of a Supreme Court justice. It would be good to know that there is some other, that we could rely upon justices to be able to recuse themselves or to be clear about when they should be, especially because they've had that sort of flexibility. I certainly understand why that flexibility is in place. But for example, in this case, I hope that if Justice Jackson were to recuse herself in this proceeding, that Justice Thomas would also take it upon himself to recuse himself if, in fact, there are any proceedings that make it to the Supreme Court regarding January 6th.
Kalia, what's your reaction to her recusing from that case potentially? I mean, because then we're talking about an affirmative action case where the black woman on the court she's not casting a vote. She's not providing input on that one.
Well, as Audra mentioned, I do think it's important to preserve the integrity of the system. Judges are expected to be impartial, and as part of that impartiality assessment, when one may have, at least from an outside perspective, may have a vested interest here, Justice Jackson serves on the governing board for Harvard, that could compromise the American public's faith or confidence in the system. So I think a recusal is appropriate. However, I think it's important to note that when the Supreme Court does consider the affirmative action cases, there's another case involving the University of North Carolina that Justice Jackson may be able to weigh in on that case, which hopefully her perspectives with respect to weighing in that case could sort of put the other justices on notice of her position with respect to affirmative action as a whole.
Politicians, obviously calling Jackson's confirmation a groundbreaking moment, including Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who had this to say, quote, "Jackson may be the first, but she will certainly not be the last. She will continue to inspire many others who look like her to follow in her footsteps." Kalia, how does this confirmation sort of open the door for lawyers with more varied backgrounds, for example, with a history of being a public defender? How does that open the door for more diversity than we typically see professionally?
I have a quote that really resonates with me. You can't be what you cannot see. I think now Justice Jackson's confirmation and her appointment to the court will encourage others who may have similar career paths to be audacious enough to actually express their interest in serving on the Supreme Court. When before, many folks who were prior federal defenders thought that it was a complete impossibility. Black women lawyers thought it was a complete impossibility. And now those impossibilities are now filled with hope and assurance that you too can also ascend to the highest court in the land.
Audra, we've got just a few seconds left, but over the years, the Senate SCOTUS confirmation votes have gotten more and more divided. This one 53 to 47. 15, 20 seconds. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells us where we are right now in terms of our great political divide. I am happy at least that there were 3 Republicans that did vote confirmation. But we have a lot of work to do, a lot of discussions to have. And really, we have to be thinking very carefully about just the polarization in this country that is now possibly infecting the highest court of the land, where impartiality is key.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Kalia Coleman and Audra Wilson for joining us.
Thank you.
Back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A panel of state legislators react to the new budget, anti-crime legislation, and much more from the latest session in Springfield.
Plus, satisfying our sweet tooth at Dinkle's one last time before the century-old bakery shuts its ovens for good. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.